Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Burbank, and I have the podcast for Come Back to Success here on YouTube and other platforms as well. Happy to be here to talk with you guys about mental health. And in today's conversation, I'm going to be having the guest, his name is Mike Black. Before we go into that, I just wanted to give you a quick synopsis about what we do here at the Come Back to Success podcast and what I've been able to start doing to help promote mental health awareness and helping other people. With the podcast guests that I interview, my goal is to help give you more mental health awareness and support, and also with tangible ways to structure your life and better achieve your goals if you have mental health challenges. And for those audiences who don't have those experiences, who are just trying to learn about other experiences from mental health and other professionals who have a lot of expertise and experience on how to serve other people who have mental health challenges, you're welcome here as well. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Mike Black.
Hi
Mike,
there.
thank you so much for being on my podcast today. And we're going to just have a great time, a great discussion, and great dialogue to help really inform all the audience more information about how to overcome mental health challenges, how to be more mindful of their mental health, and focus on their own life so that they can live a happier and healthier life.
Yep, that sounds great. Thanks
Cool.
thanks for inviting me to do this.
Yes, of course. So with that being said, I'm going to give uh, do a quick brief bio of Mike Black's bio so that you guys can learn more about Mike and how he really is an expert here in Whatcom County to help serving the mental health community. So with that being said, Mike's educational background includes a bachelor's degree in psychology at Cal State Northridge, a master's degree in marriage and family therapy at Fuller Seminary. Mike has over 30 years of experience as a counselor in his private practice, also school counselor for 26 years in middle and high school, 10 years experience in drug and alcohol treatment. So Mike has definitely gone through a lot of extensive career related work with the mental health field, which is great. And then also the last thing I'll say is here it is. Mike likes to balance his life between the intensity of his work with the joy of play and humor. With that being said, Mike Black.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be partnering with you in this, to be able to reach out to help people and support them, whether it's prevention or moving forward, whatever it might be. So I'd love to be able to answer your questions and give whatever expertise and insights I can help with today.
Awesome, fantastic. Well, Mike, let's get into it then with the first question. The first question is, what would be the biggest piece of advice that you can give to someone who is struggling with their mental health?
Well, it's interesting because I'll just kind of answer in a roundabout manner to start with. I wrote a book 2 years ago that I'll talk a little bit about later. And in writing that book, I was actually teaching myself things in a way that I didn't realize. In a way of answering your questions, I found out that one of the mysteries and somewhat of a secret of life, not really a secret, a mystery, with so many people I work with in the schools and drug and alcohol treatment and other people in between as a counselor, but even my own journey, that one of the things that helps us to struggle less ironically, is to embrace our struggles. What I mean by that is not to like them, but to acknowledge them fully. To put it very simply, Brandon, the main reason why people struggle in life, we struggle in life, even you and I, is because we avoid things. And so the opposite of that is to embrace it. Let me give you a quick example. When I worked in treatment for 10 years, I went to many AA meetings and heard many what we call first steps. The first step of AA is my life is powerless, my life is unmanageable because of my drug or alcohol usage. The more that they embraced their first step, which was very painful, by the way, the longer they stayed sober. But if they didn't do a very good job in their first step and only did it in their head and not their heart, they typically didn't stay sober. That's a real life metaphor for anybody in life, even if they're not alcoholics, that the less that we embrace our struggles and deny that they're and minimize them, the longer we struggle. So, if a word of advice is that as hard as it is, embrace your struggles to the point that you're saying, yes, I am this, I am that. And it's very painful to do that. But from that comes so much healing later. So there's so many things I could say, but when I wrote my book, Brandon, that's the thing I retaught myself, but this time in bold print. So does that make sense, Brandon?
Yeah, no, that's a great example. Just to give you a recap of when I understood what you were saying is that I think the biggest takeaway what I got from what you said is how if we as an individual or who has a mental illness, mental health challenge can embrace that, the word that comes to mind for me is it's called radical acceptance.
Yes.
And I think that you're hitting the nail on the head, Mike, with how you're trying to really emphasize that for the people that you serve, to reminding them to embrace their struggles, embrace their challenges, take on to that, and then eventually they can work through their challenges and become a more stable individual. Does that?
Can I say just one thing about it? An
Yeah.
example I'd like to give is that if a type 1 diabetic doesn't acknowledge that they have type 1 diabetes, they're never going to get to a place of getting the insulin that they need that normalizes their behavior. And so that's the way I'd like to put it. And so because of that, I love to use the example of diabetes because why would I judge somebody for having type 1 diabetes? Likewise, I don't judge people for having mental illness.
Yeah.
So I just statement with question number one.
Okay, that's great. Well, that also brings up another great point about how a lot of people in this world with mental health are impacted by stigma. And that's
Yes.
kind of where we have to kind of like work on that and as a community, as a nation, so that we can be more open-minded for other individuals. So I like where you're going with this.
Thanks, Brian. Well stated with the stigma. Go ahead.
Okay, so the next question that we have is, why is it important that the youth population learn more about mental health?
Excellent question. That's more for prevention purposes. I would just say this that the last 5 years, I've seen an uptick in mental illness, particularly around anxiety. And a lot of that is because of the year 2020 with the shutdown of society. And this is not a political statement at all. I'm just literally saying what I noticed. An example is when I was a middle school counselor, I saw firsthand what that did to middle school kids, for kids to have to learn on Zoom and not to be in the classroom and to be away from their peers. It created this pandemic of anxiety amongst so many kids in today's society. For example, we have a lot of freshmen in high school who are still as if they're fifth or sixth graders. That's a precursor to so much mental illness. And so it's so important to understand about mental illness in order to be able to not minimize it, to prevent it from even happening, right? Because remember, I said earlier, the more we avoid things, the more we struggle. And so, as a therapist, Brandon, I see so many young adults and adolescents that have so much anxiety, so much more than compared to before 5, 6 years ago, before the year 2020.
That's interesting, Mike. I'm kind of curious about what are your thoughts on what are some tangible ways to educate the youth so that they can basically set themselves up for success once they reach their adult life, as well as helping other people, because there's so many people that are impacted as you get older that might become diagnosed with the condition.
Let me give you an example. What I do in therapy quite well, especially with people with anxiety, I normalize their anxiety so that they don't think they're crazy. So, for example, if I ask an adolescent, what was life like for you before the year 2020? They'll say life was good, life was okay. Well, guess what? The issue isn't you, it's what happened in 2020. And so then they talk about their anxiety, and normalizing it means they externalize it so it's no longer them. It's a paradox. What I mean by that is that if an alcoholic acknowledges their alcoholism, they go through a period of time of actually identifying with it almost too much. But the more that they're sober, the longer that it no longer defines who they are. It's a paradox. It's an upside down kind of process. So in a roundabout way, I'm asking your question, answering questions that we need to acknowledge anxiety as being normal and okay. And
Mhm.
as long as people do that, then they can handle it. But if they constantly walk around saying, I don't like this anxiety, I don't want to feel that way, it raises its ugly head that much more. So it kind of goes back to the first question you asked, but in a different way. We need way to prevent it is to normalize their anxiety. Of course, you have anxiety. Now let's find a way to deal with it.
That's great, Mike. I like the theme about normalizing anxiety and normalizing mental health. And
Yeah.
I really believe that what can lead to that as well is to helping to create more mental health awareness in our
Yes.
nation is through creating more conversations in general around mental health.
Yeah.
And when we do that, then we can start to really destigmatize the topic of mental health and give people more of a chance to reflect on their own life as well as the lives of other people. And that's kind of what I feel like you're doing to in your career path, as well as me as a speaker and trying to be an advocate and somebody who has lived experience.
Can I just share one more thing before you go to the next question?
Sure.
So in my own real life, as a therapist, I'm oftentimes transparent and share part of my own story because we're all broken. Yes, I've got a master's degree and I'm a Christian. I'm covered by the righteousness of Christ, but I'm also broken. And that's why I don't judge you or anybody else. So I have a daughter, she's 22, she has Down syndrome, and she has taught me how many special needs I have. We all have special needs, right? And so for every weakness that somebody has, which might be special needs, where really I don't see it as a weakness, there's so many more strengths, and so that's just sort of a paradox of life. Again, it's sort of upside downness of life that's an utmost mystery. So I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but it kind of fits into the first two questions. So,
Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, so the next question we have is what are some ways that someone who is struggling with mental health can bounce back? And what are some of the catalysts to bounce back?
oh, I love that. My book that I wrote 2 years ago is all about bouncing back. It's all about resiliency. And the key thing, whether somebody has mental illness or not, but particularly if they do, is that it's so important to hang on to your strengths. Everybody has strengths. My daughter, who I just spoke of, has so many strengths that I can't begin to tell you about. And we treat her as Kaylee first, that's her name, and secondly, her special needs. That's part of why Brandon, she functions so well. So, in answer to your question, if you're struggling, if anybody listening to this podcast and here and watching it is struggling with mental illness and really struggling with the dynamic of it, and you almost feel like you're a diabetic without insulin, a place to start is to focus on your strengths. And if you don't know what they are, then think about what people who you love, what they would say, what their strengths are, and believe them. So it's important to hang on to the strengths that you have. Like my daughter, she may have a really low IQ, but she has an incredibly high EQ, emotional intelligence. She knows how to love better than anybody, and yet somehow we call her special needs. So she is able to be resilient because she loves so well. And so it's important to hang on to the strengths that you have and move forward. The other thing in light of that is that there's a period in life when we struggle, like when we first find out we have a diagnosis, where yes, we look back and it's like walking in the mud. It's so hard, but eventually we need to make a choice to stop looking back at where we were in the mud that we're in and start walking. One of the best ways to lessen the mud on your feet when you're walking in the mud is to be able to start walking. Eventually that mud decreases and you set your eyes on the goal with the strengths in mind.
Oh,
So,
great.
but again, to be fair, almost all of us who struggle with a diagnosis or something, yes, we have to look back and it's like being in the mud. Who of us have not experienced that? But eventually we make a choice to focus on our strengths and start walking forward rather than looking back. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, no, that's a great analogy about how starting somewhere and then continuing to progress as you continue to walk. And then eventually, maybe the analogy is you can run. And then if you apply that into other areas of your life, maybe it's somebody who is unemployed at the time, but then they want to get back into working a part-time job and then they can eventually do a full-time job. Or maybe it's just part-time and that works best for them. Other examples are, maybe somebody has gets into a relationship and it's a healthy relationship so that they can support one another and be the best versions of themselves and have a healthy supportive unit of people in their lives. So
Can I give the listeners just a practical tool
sure.
in that? Is that what you do? And I've done this in my life before when I struggled with some things in my life 5, 6 years ago, and even before that. You think and write about a time in your life where you overcame something, not now, but in your past. Maybe 5, 10 years ago where you really struggled, and write down how you overcame it and what helped you to overcome it. Then write down your strengths and use that as a compass for this situation that you're in now. It helps so much to look at your testimony, how you've overcome something in your life in the past. And if not you, think of someone else that you see as a role model, and then write down your strengths and use that as a guide, as a compass to move forward.
That sounds great. Yeah, so like reflection, really giving yourself that time to reflect on where you're at in the past and where you're at now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Um, how does counseling have an impact on someone's mental health, and who do you recommend counseling for?
Excellent question. You ask great questions, by the way. Um, is that let's see, let me start with this part. I'm looking at the question here as well as you shared that. Um, well, when you might be asking yourself, those of you who are listening and watching this, when would I need the counseling? When I wouldn't? Well, again, if you don't mind, I'm going to go back to the analogy of somebody who might have a drinking problem. They know that they need help when the negative outweighs the positive, or they just can't function as well as they used to because of their habit of drinking. Well, in a similar way, if somebody's mental illness is really starting to interfere with their life where they can't function well because they can't think clearly, you feel as if you're like a diabetic without insulin. That is not your fault, right? And so once the negative starts outweighing the positive and or it starts affecting one or two more areas of your life, that's the time to seek help. No,
Great. So
yeah,
what you're saying is that before something progressively bad, is that what you're saying?
yes, definitely, definitely. And so, what does a counselor do? Well, here's what I do. I have a mindset for myself, Brandon, that whenever I meet with a client, that a person doesn't give me permission to help them unless I first understand their story. I'll say that again. A person doesn't give me permission to help them unless I first understand their story. So find a therapist that will first listen and then give advice. I don't know about you, Brandon, but when I struggle, I need people just to listen initially and then maybe give advice later. Um,
Yes.
I'm probably not supposed to say this, but that's why I can't stand Dr. Phil because he hardly even listens. All he does is give advice. So he gives the Band-Aid approach, not the surgery that people need. I listen a lot the first one or two sessions, and that in itself relieves the pressure for the person, and then move forward and then give skills, not so much externally like behavior, but more internally. So much, Brandon, of what good therapy is about is not so much behavioral changes, but changing your mindset, changing how you feel, how you react. I'm going to share with you before we finish this question that the saying I heard at a workshop 2 years ago, to be honest with you, it should be written in the Bible, but it's not. It's such a good saying. I'll say it twice because I had to hear it twice that is that in order to change the way you feel, you have to change the way you think. I'll say it again. In order to change the way you feel, change the way you think. Brandon, you and I and everybody listening, we cannot control how we feel. I don't know if you can relate to that. If I'm ticked, I'm ticked. If I'm happy, I'm happy. But we can control the way we think. If you don't mind, I'm going to quote the Bible in Romans 12. Paul says, renew the mind. And really, what that means is to change the mindset. And whether you're a believer in Christ or God or not, that doesn't matter so much. The more thing is about reframing your thinking, and a good therapist helps you to do that. So listen first and then help the person reframe their thinking to be able to handle their anxiety and or whatever things in other ways. So does that make sense in terms
Yeah.
of,
You had great examples.
yeah.
Okay, so let's do number five is what changes would you like to see in how society approaches mental health?
Oh, that is a great question. Some of you who are watching and listening to the podcast might disagree with this statement, but one of the griefs that I have in living in Whatcom County, even though I love living here, especially when the sun's out,
Yeah.
is there's so many loopholes and gaps in our mental health system. I mean, I'll be blunt with you. A person is almost better off being an alcoholic because they'll get better treatment so often than somebody that has mental illness. So it's not that I'm trying to diss the mental health system, but
Wow.
there's a lot of loopholes in our system, a lot. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't seek help because of what I just said, but be aware that it's important for those of you who have mental health issues to advocate for yourself, have a voice and say, this medication is not working for me, or I don't want to try medication. Let me try something differently. Guess what, Mr. Counselor? You're not helping in the way that I need. Can you send me to someone else? That's what I'm about advocating. Speak your mind, not in a rude way, but let
Definitely.
people know what you need, right?
Yes. No, that's well said. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, so what got you into your career as a counselor?
Excellent question. You know what's funny? It's kind of a humorous story. Was at Cal I was at Cal State Northridge, had not proclaimed my psychology major yet, and I was kind of a clueless 19-year-old at the time. This is back in the days where I had hair.
Okay.
And so I asked the counselor at the community college, I said, so I don't know what I'm going to do in life. And he asked me about 10 questions. He said, you need to be a counselor. You need to go into psychology. The guy was right on. He barely even knew me. And they proceeded to tell me about Fuller Seminary, which is a Christian-based school. That's exactly what I needed. It fit me because I love helping people. My bias, by the way, in my master's degree is what we call family systems. So I'm not so much about diagnosing people as much as seeing them in the context of family. That's my bias. And so, and another answer to your question, and I'm just going to share my spiritual testimony if you don't mind, because it is literally answer to your question. In high school, from freshman to sophomore, junior year, I had stomach aches, Brandon, every day, constantly. And I was this close at the age of 17 to having an ulcer. What is an ulcer? It's like a growth in your stomach because of worrying too much. And imagine that of being the ripe age of only 16, 17, of stomach aches constantly because I internalized my anxiety so much.
Wow.
And so I went on a retreat the senior year of high school and I rebelled from my Catholic upbringing. I was actually smoking pot 2 or 3 times for about 3 years. I did that pretty regularly. Went on this retreat, and on the retreat, I felt the love of God so much with people around me. No one prayed for me or anything, that by the end of that weekend, my stomach was completely healed, completely healed. So, very simply, in answer to your question, my calling in life is to help other people's stomach aches, if that makes sense. Other people's anxieties. Because now I have compassion, not just empathy. Empathy means I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. I have compassion because I know what it feels like to have a paralyzing anxiety from my high school years, even a few times. So it's because of my own testimony, especially spiritually, as to why I'm a counselor. And this is my calling in life, and I love doing it. So
Awesome.
that makes sense, bud?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Mike, what do you do for fun that keeps you happy?
Well, like I said, well, you said it in a more formal way, but I'm either really Mr. Intense, because that's why I'm as a counselor. I'm totally a kid. I was a middle school counselor for 20 years for a reason, because I'm an absolute kid. And I mean that in a good way, because I'll be honest with you, I prefer working with middle and high school kids and even adults, because some adults just don't know how to have fun anymore. If anybody knows how to have fun, middle schoolers and high schoolers do, right? And so I like to play pickleball. That's actually a huge stress outlet for me. I do it 2 or 3 times a week. I like having fun. I love watching movies like Will Ferrell movies and Jack Black.
Yeah.
And yeah, I realize it's PG-13, but it's outright funny stuff for me. Uh, and those, and I love being with my wife and kids and having fun. I love game nights, just having game nights where we have fun together. So I'm either really intense or I'm totally Mr. Kid and have fun. And so that's sort of the realm of my personality. I've also played drums since I was 10. I play drums at church, but I'll just confess that I'm a total classic rock fan. I love Led Zeppelin and Rolling Stones and Beatles. It's some I've been a drummer longer than I've known God and my wife and everything, and it's a big outlet in my life. So those are the very many ways that I have fun.
That's
So,
great. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. And then the last question that we have is, could you tell us a little bit more about your latest book?
yeah. So I wrote a book 2 years ago, and I actually Brandon did two bucket lists 2 years ago. One is I wrote a book. The other one is I went to Israel, which was an amazing experience. But yeah, my book is called Rise Above It. It's available on Amazon. And the book is mainly about 30 years of counseling have I done with the mindset of what is trauma and why and how do people go through trauma? How does trauma affect you? And then guess what? Bouncing back, how do you become resilient? What does it mean to be resilient? To be fair to all of the listeners and watchers, it does involve psychological stuff, good mindset stuff. It also very much involves faith stuff as well. A lot of biblical stories. People, when they've read the book, they've told me they hear my voice in it, and so it's called Rise Above It. It's available on Amazon.
Yeah,
So
the link will be in the description
yeah,
for when I post this on the social media platforms. So for those of you that are interested in reading Mike's book, the link will be available. It's on Amazon. And as we wrap up this podcast episode for today, Mike, I just want to say thank you again for being on the podcast today. And I think that we made a lot of good progress to helping unlocking the potential for helping other people around mental health and their struggles.
great. Thank you so much for allowing me to partner with you in this, Brandon.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that being said, thank you so much to our listeners and viewers for watching this today. If you have any other further questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. And I hope you have a great day, guys. Take care.
God bless everybody. Okay.